Should have got a Red Bull in. Before
Oi.
We're good to go. All right. Well, welcome everyone. Super excited to be joined. A couple of AEO Kings. My legendary business partner, Mike Bird. Mike, welcome.
Thank you, George. Great to be here in your office.
We were just talking before we came on camera that this is Mike's second podcast for the day, so he's somewhat of an expert when it comes to this now.
I'm an influencer, aspiring influencer. That's my official thing. Yeah.
And then we've got Jeremy. Jeremy, big welcome to you.
Thanks for having me, guys.
For those of you who don't know Jeremy, he's one of the co-founders of Finder and very knowledgeable when it comes to all things AI, also all things kind of search. So very excited to be joined by these two to chat about what's happening kind of across the Google AEO kind of search ecosystem today and learning a little bit about how brands can get discovered beyond Google. So maybe if we can kind of just kick things off, I suppose both of you have built big businesses, off the back of search. I think that's been a key part of both of your strategies. If we sort of go back to, 15 years ago, I'd love to kind of hear from you some insights around, the role that search played in kind of growing your businesses and how important SEO actually was to starting the business. So maybe, Jeremy, I'll kick it to you to kind of start things off.
Yeah, it pretty much was the entire thing. It was like total obsession. Chose our company name at the time, like the domain name.
True.
Yeah, Credit Card Finder was an exact match domain name that was available.
We love those exact match domains.
Yeah, exactly. I'd say like everything was about like focusing on the inputs that drove SEO outcomes. High quality content.
Yeah.
The best backlinks we could get, and making sure the foundations were there technically to perform. So. Yeah, it was like an obsession with the customer and the user and trying to understand what there was demand for, like people searching. And really for us, it was about creating as much content as possible to feed the machine.
Yeah.
And that's what we did.
How out of interest, and Mike, I'll ask you the same question in a second, but out of interest, how long was it till you kind of crossed over into, I guess, more like above the line brand tactics? Obviously, Finder now is an enormous, highly recognizable brand here in Australia. What was kind of the tipping point from the, I suppose, more like growth hacky SEO kind of growth marketing strategies versus kind of having a transition into like more of the brand stuff?
Yeah, I'd say the SEO run was like a solid 7 or 8 years.
Yeah.
And I remember I was in the UK at this conference, and like last person standing. It was about 6 a.m. It was like me.
I love it.
Yeah, it was like an agency of a competitor in the UK, someone in-house at a competitor in the UK. And they're like, just go back and focus on brand and above the line. I was like, that's really interesting. Came back, spoke to Fred. Fred engineered this earworm essentially. The Finder jingle, which people know.
On the finder.com.au.
Yes, thank you for doing it for me. And if you think about that, right, like we're telling people, we used to say in the ad is like, just type it in, finder.com.au. And why we wanted to do that was the type in traffic was about brand kind of search volume. And it was like this kind of artificial boost for Finder as a domain. And we didn't even own finder.com.au until about probably 2014-ish. So 2015 actually is when we bought it.
How far through the journey were you at that point?
Technically I'd say like about 6 years in kind of thing. So we were building out each site separately. So we bought finder.com in 2013, finder.com in 2015. And the reason why we bought it, I think, was like looking at the graphs and going, look, for us to keep growing, I think it's about a halo effect in growing the category and not just, kind of relying on what, demand already existed. So that's really where we felt brand played a critical role.
Yeah, interesting. And Mike, obviously having been on the journey with you, I know, SEO has definitely been one of your superpowers over the last couple of decades. What do you think when you look back to, when we started The Garden and then, eventually moved into the property portal space, what do you think it was about, SEO and organic search perhaps that we saw that others maybe didn't see, or, what was kind of, I suppose, different in our approach to probably some of the Goliaths that we were kind of competing with at the time?
Yeah, the way that I think about these things is, you've got to play to your natural strengths and play where you can actually win. And I think when we're competing with multi-billion-dollar companies, where we're never going to win is who can spend the most amount of money. You know, that's a reality, and you know that includes brand and includes above the line TV, radio, all this kind of thing. Like our competitors can just drown us.
Yeah.
So I think if it's the way that I kind of think about marketing is broadly in two buckets. There's kind of you know, money-based channels, which is the things I mentioned before, and then there's like skill-based channels. And in some ways, with the skill-based channels, I think there's only kind of a couple of them.
Yeah.
You know, I think some people are amazing and above the line, and there's to an extent they can kind of create an arbitrage by just having phenomenal execution within those channels. But at the end of the day, it's kind of an accelerator on top of the investment.
Correct.
And the reality for us is
Well said.
even if we are 5 times better than REA and Domain at above the line marketing, the reality is they can spend 100 times more than us in marketing. So the dilution of that skill base, that's why I don't consider it as much of kind of an arbitrage channel that's available to be won. And so I think for us and for other kind of scale ups and startups and things like that, it's really thinking through where can you bring a degree of really high quality execution where almost irrespective of the amount of money that's deployed into that channel by an incumbent player that can afford to spend more, you know, you can actually win. And I think SEO is was the first one that I felt like that was like that.
Yeah.
I think the other one that kind of exists right now is organic social content, which, you know, I think we do a pretty good job on LinkedIn on, and we do not a great job yet on the consumer channels. But to answer the question, you know, I think the reason we focused on SEO as a channel is because we felt like we had a real shot of being successful.
Yeah, I think,
and it was one of a limited set of options.
yeah, you look at, I mean, to your point is, you know, social content as the other channel. I mean, you look at the rise of, you know, not just social media influencers, but kind of the YouTube economy and how that's all been built really off. That hasn't been built by spending a whole bunch of money, but guys like iShowSpeed who just turned up and recorded content every day for, you know, just an absurd amount of time, have kind of built these insane followings. And that's kind of, again, like as a result of, you know, applying their skill to a channel where that arbitrage actually exists.
100%, yeah.
In terms of, I guess, AEO is obviously the topic that we're talking about today. You know, Google's come out and more or less said that AEO, SEO, basically the same thing. So I'm keen to kind of get some insights from the two of you on you know, your perspective on that. But as part of that question, I'd like to ask you both, you know, if you go back to, you know, if you were starting from scratch again today, would search in the same way, you know, it was kind of a core focus for you guys for 6 or 7 years, would search still remain as the kind of core focus, do you think? And, you know, probably for you, Mike, you know, you mentioned social video. Yeah, is it still kind of search first and social second? So yeah, maybe Jeremy, if I start off first and foremost, is AEO a completely new category? Is it an extension of SEO? And then if you were to start again, yeah, how would you think about, you know, as it relates to your strategy?
Yeah, look, traditional SEO still very much matters, but I wouldn't oversimplify it in the sense that it's just traditional SEO is going to get you the results in these, you know, very different landscape. Ultimately, the biggest difference here is from search to more discoverability piece, right? And so in essence, every company needs to be discoverable. I think the surface area has shifted a lot. It's now no longer, you know, just appearing as one of the 10 blue links and, you know, getting links to your website and, you know, creating relevant pages to try and rank. It's now very much about this challenge of like trying to make sense of, you know, this whole corpus of documents and references online, which effectively impact what's said about your brand. Mm-hmm. And is it saying the correct thing about your brand? Is it saying the things you want it to say about your brand? And, you know, how can you, I guess, direct that that mention towards somebody ideally wanting to take an action, you know, where, you know, whether it be buying a product or, you know, using your company's service on using your brand or your company as the preferred business. So, you know, there's a lot that goes into that. And I think the piece on, you know, social content and so on being critical, like, you know, for me, the thing around it is, you know, if I was to go back in time, I would have probably invested more into that channel earlier when I kind of spotted it. I always had like innovation teams that would try and spin it up, like, you know, so many failed attempts from about 2015 onwards. But really for me, what you're doing is manufacturing trust at scale. You know, for each kind of, whether it be like hour of content online that exists, it definitely compounds. And so for us, like, you know, text-based content compounded over very many years for us. But I think there's just so many ways that people are discovering businesses and needing to kind of learn about a company, whether it be on on social, scrolling a feed, or watching a video on YouTube, or whatever it is. But ultimately, I think it's about a brand building trust in them with their target market. And so I do believe it's SEO is going to help you and it'll get you a good start. But there's so many other websites that matter right now to determine what's said about your brand within these answer engines.
Yeah. And Mike, how about you? If you were to go back into the time machine, call it 7-8 years ago when we kind of started the platform journey, do you think that search would still be the core focus from a channel point of view
today
for apartments? Yeah, today.
I mean, like I kind of look at, we've kind of got a live example, right? Because we've got iBuild New.
True.
So a business we bought last year, and I'm spending a lot of time on that SEO now. I think SEO and AEO are, as you correctly pointed out, are kind of distinct in their own right, but there are plenty of similarities.
Yeah.
And I think, people say that SEO is dead, maybe right in some categories, but not right in most. Like I look at apartments in the last 12 months, we've had, call it 10 times more growth in SEO compared to last year than our total AEO contribution put together. And so, from a performance point of view, we're still very focused on executing within the SEO environment, but we're doing some things slightly differently to capture the AEO space as well. I think for iBuild New, and to the original question of what will we do today, I think for certain types of companies, particularly aggregators and marketplaces and things like that, SEO is still a huge channel and opportunity. I think where that's beginning to change is more complex products. So we have a mutual friend who I won't share their name, but they run a large, quite technical SaaS product, and they get 30% of all their leads now come from AEO, where a lot of the discoverability of the product is quite nuanced in terms of understanding the types of questions to ask, versus like for our product where it might be like, show me some new apartments that are for sale here in Abbotsford. That's kind of like a relatively straightforward thing. The reason I think that we do still get a lot of SEO, and the relative balance between SEO and AEO within our category is kind of still tilting towards SEO, is because the currency or the real time nature of how things change in terms of what's available in Abbotsford isn't able to be digested as easily and stored within kind of a database environment for the AI platforms. And so therefore SEO continues to, because it's easier for the SEO listings to change more frequently as the market changes. I think that's why SEO is kind of, in real estate in general, has been a slower transition from SEO to AEO versus like complex software products or other just generally complex products. And perhaps credit cards and stuff might be in that example where a query like, credit cards optimized for flights between here and Europe in terms of the points. And the more complex the query is, the more naturally it kind of lends itself towards the AEO space, and the more how important the recency and the accuracy of the data and how frequently that data changes kind of tilts the direction back towards SEO. And for the categories that we work in, it's currently still tilting towards SEO, but certainly I'm expecting that to evolve over time.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, for you, Jeremy, how have you seen that kind of transpire? Obviously Finder has a crazy amount of, options for people to look and discover new products. There's a lot of comparison on Finder as well. How have you seen the traffic translate in terms of LLMs and people kind of coming via LLMs kind of into the Finder platform?
Yeah, look, the quality is phenomenal. I think to your point, really people are spending a lot more time researching on these platforms. So by the time they ultimately land on Finder, it's definitely high quality traffic. And it's interesting though, right? Like we've been tuned towards traffic as the metric.
Yeah.
And I do think that, for a very long time, that's still going to be the case, where clicks are ultimately, what we are measuring things against. But, really what we need to start looking at is like how we're influencing, I guess, the decisions people are making and what's being said about our brand as well alongside that. And, that's difficult because it's hard to measure. And, we are, ultimately in the same space where there's still the same amount of people seeking to buy that product or that service each day, right? It's not like it's suddenly shifted. So yeah, I think we need to start looking at different ways of measuring, whether it be like clickstream data or looking at the propensity for someone to kind of see a mention of a brand and then go and visit the website and take an action. There's a study from SimilarWeb just recently which showed that if a brand is mentioned in an answer, that they're 2.5 times more likely to go and visit that website without even a click. So yeah, this stuff really matters. To your point as well on the kind of the nature of the data that the query depends on, the prompt depends on. In say the credit cards example, on the 1st of October, there's a big change around rewards. On that moment in time, like you can't base it on training data on an LLM.
Yeah.
It needs to use the open web.
True.
And maybe the open web's not even ready yet because it's not published enough information to kind of allow it to be a credible and reliable response. So you do need websites like Finder that are up to date to the minute to be able to complete the action still. So I do think there's a very interesting piece there where data is at the center of this story, I think, with how you can kind of build moats and be competitive going forward as a business.
Yeah. You talked to brand mentions and the importance of brand mentions. Obviously, digital PR, as it's called, has kind of become really prominent in terms of SEO and AEO as well. In terms of like, if I think about SEO broadly, you kind of bucket it as you've got technical on-page SEO, you've got backlinks, and then you've kind of got content, and obviously there's a whole bunch of technical stuff in terms of on page. With relation to particularly, we'll talk about content in a moment, but to focus on backlinks and brand mentions, as a starting point, how is this evolving? Like, are backlinks still an important part? Does how you think about backlinks with this new kind of digital PR push change, and like how are both of you thinking about brand in the context of links and third-party content?
Yeah, so I always think about the origins of why something was created in the first place. A hyperlink was designed for crawlers humans actually click on and go and visit another page or document on the internet, and crawlers use it for discoverability. So Google's got trillions of pages as indexed for its crawler over many years. OpenAI, they're all starting to build their own crawlers and effectively have to discover the same websites that and build their own indexes separate to Bing and Google, et cetera, right? So at this point, links really matter, though they're not necessarily the determinant as to whether or not you show up in an answer. Really, the mention more than anything is what's most important, and from credible and citable sources. So at this point, I still think it's important to get the mention, and if you get a backlink, there's a benefit from a traditional SEO perspective, but it's not what we should solely be focused on.
Yeah, and Mike, I know we're obviously pretty focused on like digital PR. Obviously, content is a huge part of apartments, both on-site and off-site. How are you thinking about how I guess search is evolving in the context of the property portals now, and in relation to backlinks and gaining trust from third parties?
Yeah, I think so. On the tilt between SEO and AEO, I think from an SEO point of view, backlinks, the relative value of a backlink compared to a brand mention is significantly more valuable with the backlink, as Jeremy described. I think for the AEO side, the balance between a brand mention and a backlink is kind of the gap is smaller. I think over time, what we'll see is that backlinks, the AI companies will effectively require less of the backlinks to be able to, have less for discoverability purposes. So as the crawlers go out, they go through the internet, they find a backlink, they go through that, and then they discover that what's on the other side of the backlink, and then that becomes like a path, almost like a neural networking inside your brain. So that kind of works its way through. I think as more of the internet gets indexed over time, and then the LLM, so whether it's OpenAI or Anthropic, have more of that kind of database of content from the index in the same way that Google already has it, there's going to be a pivot between like a closing in the gap and value between a backlink and a brand mention. So I think for now, SEO is much better to get backlinks, somewhat valuable to get brand links, brand mentions. On the AI side, I think backlinks are still more valuable than the mentions, but the gap between those two things will close as the indexation of the internet becomes more comprehensive from the AIs to represent more similarly to Google.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Like you look, I think it's still on ChatGPT, Reddit's still the number one cited platform, and I think LinkedIn is currently number 2, which is kind of wild. So it kind of opens up, I guess, the question, if you go back to 20 years ago, we had link farms and everyone kind of gamifying backlinks back then to try and trick the search engines. Obviously, there's a lot of that happening now on Reddit and LinkedIn. Have either of you had any experience or seen any research around, people's ability to kind of influence brand mentions through like creating 1,000 subreddits on a particular topic? Or
Yeah.
I feel like if anyone knows this, it's you.
Yeah, I've been gaming Reddit since about 2015, like randomly. I got into it back then when I was kind of cranking Finder globally.
Such an OG. It's so good.
Yeah. So I'd say, it's interesting, right? Because we're looking at ChatGPT and we're looking at Google.
Yeah.
Google still has 91% share of traditional search, and the sleeper as well is YouTube. Like for informational queries, long form video is actually doing a lot for AI mode. So that's still disproportionately more people than ChatGPT. But yeah, I'd say there's definitely been success with the silliest of things you can imagine. I saw someone the other day literally did a LinkedIn post saying, I am an expert at something, just like a one sentence thing. And it's like, that was it. And then within, I think it was within a few days, they were appearing in the AI overview with a direct quote of their LinkedIn post. Similarly with Reddit, I think, there's so many ways where Reddit matters. Why it became a phenomenon in the first place was people were appending Reddit on the end of searches. So people were typing like, best credit cards, Reddit. They wanted that non-biased, non-corporate view as to what the best credit card was. And so they'd arrive to Reddit and hope for that, I guess, as an expectation. So Google had to to stop people like leaving off in hordes to Reddit, like they'd start showing information in their AI overviews and the discussions and forums section. So still from that perspective alone, for traditional search, Reddit matters.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm definitely seeing, like, if you look at the Reddit threads that are coming up and like the prompts, depending on the prompt you track, it's fairly straightforward to make sure you're included in that thread, assuming comments are open. And yeah, I feel like it's a delicate thing though. I'm not going to encourage any brand to just go out there and start posting on Reddit, because you can get your brand banned and or your domain banned at a subreddit level. So you kind of lose an entire channel.
Right, okay.
So even if it's not you posting, your customers might attempt to talk about your brand and just...
Can you see when you've been banned? Like, is there a way to tell?
Well, sometimes, but there's this concept of a shadow ban as well. So they actually don't even tell you, and you think that you're posting and getting traction. And you're like, how good? But it's like, it's pretty cheeky.
Interesting. We just had a question come in from Billy, and please, for those listening online, please put your questions through. So, is AEO/GEO the guessing game SEO once was, or do we just ask the LLMs to spell it out for us? Good question in terms of like, where do you turn, I guess, to figure out from a strategy point of view? Is it really just focusing on using Claude skills and the LLMs to kind of drive your strategy, or should you be looking elsewhere into experts?
I think like what you said before in relation to the focus on traffic versus whatever key conversion metric you're kind of optimize. Like I look at our leads across our platforms every single day, and I reckon I look at our traffic maybe once a fortnight, and I'm like a fiend for the data and so focused on it. And so I think in relation, the helpful thing is, while it's difficult to know which exact query people are coming through from an LLM point of view, as well as in a search standpoint, one of the things that I have found helpful is using an MCP that connects our Ahrefs, effectively our Google Search Console data that ports through Ahrefs. For those that are kind of in the SEO game, they know what I mean. So using a combination of Google Search Console, Ahrefs, and Amplitude, which is our like product analytics platform, and then
you could use GA.
You could use Google Analytics or whatever you want.
Yep.
And then connecting those three things via an MCP and Claude, and then connecting up the conversions to try to backtrack and figure out what queries are driving what kind of outcome. So yeah, that's how we kind of think about it, and we think a lot less about traffic and a lot more about leads, in general. And so we think about like organic, as you know, with like Google Analytics, for example, you've got session and you've got medium. On the medium part, you can kind of group those together, so you can group all the AI, so it's like Perplexity, Claude, ChatGPT, and so forth, and then just bucket those together, and then you can kind of see the combined AI kind of contribution, and the same with SEO.
Yeah, you mentioned Ahrefs. It's probably a good question to ask. Is like, are there any other tools you're using in terms of kind of tracking I know Search Console's just released some new features around trying to provide more visibility to what's coming from LLMs. Is there, and I know there's like tools coming every single day. I'd love to hear either of you if there's a tool you're using that you can recommend to others kind of on the call today.
Yeah, I'd say like I'm more focused on the data the tool provides and less about the UI nowadays, to your point on the MCP piece. Ultimately for me, if I can mine data from a tool, like mainly from the API perspective, I think it's extremely powerful. So I'm using a combo of like Ahrefs, SEMrush, tools like Peak and others to do the tracking. Data for SEO as an API is pretty powerful as well. And off the back of that, then I'm doing my own analysis and creating my own dashboards. And so I would say it's more about what data can this tool provide and making sure that you're tracking the right things. Conceptually, something that's very interesting is understanding this concept called query fan out. So when somebody types in a prompt, basically ChatGPT, Claude are trying to understand what you mean by that thing, right? So they break it up and go, like the example I was talking about is like, I want the best electric car for a family of 5 in New South Wales under 50K. So best means you need recent and relevant reviews from like say August 2026. They don't care about 2023. Electric vehicle means that implicitly you care about range and all this sort of thing, right? Family of 5, you probably care about cargo space and safety. New South Wales has incentives that are specific to New South Wales that aren't available in Victoria and other states. So it has to break out this prompt into these sub prompts that effectively run, and then it goes and does all this research on your behalf, and then pulls all that information back and develops consensus and goes, okay, cool. Across all of these websites we use in this research process, this is where the information was consistent and we can validate that it was correct. And then it produces an answer and a response. And this is all happening under the hood.
Yeah.
But I think, you
click of a finger.
Literally, like, depending on the model and whatever. This is really where the game's at, is trying to understand for this type of prompt, what sources will ChatGPT or Claude need to reference in order to answer the question. And so that's where, like to your point before about Reddit and LinkedIn, YouTube, etc. Suddenly there's a lot more websites to think about. And we need to start thinking about our own pages and understanding, like, to your point, looking at, Ahrefs or Google Analytics, why did it choose that page over another page? And for me, an important concept to understand as well is the thing called information gain. So we've got to think about the meta game that's playing out here. They're all in a race to build artificial general intelligence. So effectively at a board level, they're trying to, get a race to being first, like making this available in everybody's hands. So we need to feed their metrics, which is they need to learn something new when they hit our websites. And so from my perspective, it's like, don't waste their compute, don't waste their tokens, so to speak. And so, teach them something new, teach them something relevant, and help people get to completing the task on your website. And so for me, I guess, you'll start to see patterns in your own pages as to why they're getting referenced. And typically it looks like it's well structured, it's easy to read, it's not blocking, through client-side JavaScript and things like that. And then, start replicating the winners, I guess, across other pages in your own website as well.
And is that, to your point, because again, you see a lot of people like just generally talking about, okay, you need to have FAQs, you need your content to be more structured as question and answers. And you see it now just across the web, how just about every website has FAQ section buried in the page. Like how much of it is about on-page content and your experience, to your point, like looking at the winners, and this is a question for you as well. How much have you seen it's about the on-page content versus the structure? Because I think people often overlook to what you just spoke to, which is like how effective is it, and this goes for SEO and for AEO, how effective is it at pulling the information actually out of your website? In your opinion, what's kind of the bridge, I guess, between those two things?
Yeah, I'd say it's less about the fact that it's an FAQ, to be honest. It's more like people are looking at this kind of these studies and going, oh, people added FAQs and they perform better. And so everybody tries to replicate the playbook, right?
Yeah.
So if you look at, whether it be AirOps or Profound or whatever, they release these case studies, and the case studies drive the industry behavior. And you've got to think about it as well. Like if you're a software provider, what's a repeatable tactic that I can share as part of my SaaS pricing model that everybody can implement? FAQs are very easy to do because you're writing a sentence at a time, right? And it's not like paragraphs of text that are easy to identify as AI copy. So that's really what's happening, right? It's like, so they build a feature, everyone uses the feature, the case studies drive the behavior. So really for me, it's not about the fact that it's an FAQ. It's about that there's information that was missing on the page, like evidence that could support an answer, I guess, or response from your website versus somebody else's. And yeah, because like we're all in this kind of space going, like, what works, what doesn't work. So we do the research, go to the vendors, which are spending a lot of money on marketing, and we try and I guess replicate what the people that are winning are doing. And yeah, so I'm less about it being the fact that it's an FAQ. It's more that the evidence and the information exists in the first place. Though there is a strong argument for structured information too. You know, ultimately, again, if you think about that kind of board level metric, speed matters in every single company. Like Google, it's mattered from the very beginning. They still show how many 0 point something seconds, whatever it was, to generate a result. And these engines need to return a response quickly as well. So if your website doesn't load quickly, if you can provide structured information in a format that can kind of pull that without even rendering the page, that might influence whether or not your brand turns up or not. So yeah.
Mike, I want to ask you about content and how content's changing. Obviously, content's been commoditized thanks to the LLMs. Anyone can write an article in a couple of minutes. Obviously, the quality of that article, is pretty varied. How do you think about content through the context of what Jeremy's just spoken about, which is like how are you adding new information to the web, and like how do you think about that in the context of apartments and the other platforms that you're across?
Yeah, I think actually something that Cameron McIntyre, who's the CEO at REA, said in their earnings call a couple of weeks ago, I thought was just like on point, which is I think it would be relatively straightforward to get a snapshot and to recreate a version of realestate.com.au or apartments.com.au or any kind of platform. Car sales is still the same at a given point in time. And I think to the point on the information gain, where there's kind of you can get a snapshot at of what's happening right now. But the problem, the value to the information gain piece is when that data changes.
Yeah.
And the fact that like the systems and technology that underpin these platforms that create the content is really the thing that creates the information gain and means that people can't just copy it. That's my view.
Yeah, and so I guess if you're giving advice then to the brands on here listening, is like how should they be thinking about content now through that context? Is like it's less about how many articles you're producing and the page. It's like what's the kind of lens they should be thinking about content creation and content and how it lives and breathes on their websites.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because any of us can use ChatGPT to create content, and it probably feels like a 10 out of 10. But now, from my perspective, we need to be like, okay, that's 1 out of 10 content.
Yeah.
What does 10 out of 10 content now look like? And for me, it's like an exercise that is about like how can I add information that others don't have? How can I add insight that others don't have? Unique, whether it be like quotes, experience, things that you kind of add these dimensions that in ways that your competitors can't replicate.
Yeah.
For me, with AI search, really, it's like running these prompts and trying to figure out, okay, what's being said about my brand online? Is it correct or not? If it's incorrect, it's interesting because it's probably based on evidence you haven't given it yet, right? So it's like information that needs to be on your website that's not yet live, on other websites that's not yet live. And then I think the third piece is about beyond evidence is the validation. So like to prove what you said is correct and accurate, like are there others online that when they review your business agree with what you've said, when they kind of publish content and they talk about in a listicle, here are the 3 or 5 best options in this space. If you're not included across all the popular websites, why not?
Yeah.
Right. So clearly you're not that great.
Yeah.
And so like, are the Google reviews about your business, stacking up? Are you the highest rated in the space? Like, that doesn't stack up either, right? If you've suddenly got like a 2 stars out of, on average, like it's not going to make sense if you're saying your best and competitors are getting referencing and you're not. So
do you think about that through the lens of the credit card companies wanting to be included in Finder? So I think that's like there's some real latent value that we're creating for our customers with Apartments and iBuild.New, where we're featuring their projects as like top 5 apartment developments in Brunswick, for example. Those sorts that is the classic kind of content that these AI tools want to ingest. And so I think there's kind of like a new wave of incremental value that's being created as a result of the rise of the LLMs from content platforms that have got a trusted brand and as demonstrated by having information gain and high domain authority.
Oh man, like bang on. Actually, I looked at something
almost died before because I think I've got like hay fever from the plant. It's making me cough.
But normally something I have got on me. So
I'm back though. I'm back.
yeah, I was looking at the health insurance space recently, and 36% of the citations were determined by comparison websites.
Wow.
There you go.
So like crazy numbers, right?
Yeah.
And so much so that somebody in the industry and the SEO agency side was saying, if you're not showing on Finder, you basically don't show up at all.
Oh,
for
yeah,
example.
true.
And it's
Yeah.
like, it's kind of gnarly, right? And so that's interesting. And, you know, then what does that mean from a business model perspective? Like, you know, in my view, there's a fascinating point in time where, like, you know, the point on SEO is dead. Like, if you go to Google Trends and type in search engine optimization, it's actually at an all-time high.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, literally, since, like, it tracks back from, like, 2004 to now, it's an all-time high, and it's exploding in popularity. What I think is going to play out is that we've got this short window, like, up until, you know, maybe mid or end of 2028, where large language models are still training on data, but they're going to hit this point where they don't need to anymore.
Yeah.
So what happens after that?
Yeah.
Are they going to still need to crawl the web? Are they still going to have to do things and kind of, you know, have this huge expense to find accurate answers to things? I don't know the answer. I still believe, to your point, real-time data needs to be a part of the equation, but is that through integrations or other things? I don't know.
I think anything that where the information isn't regularly changing is the commodity content.
Yeah.
So it's the how-to guides. It's
Yeah.
like we'll never invest in rewriting like the best how to buy an off-the-plan apartment or how to build a house, because it's just like the reality of the thing is those things don't actually change that much. And so once the LLMs learn how to do that thing, they're going to be the ones to solve that problem. But if it's like, show me the apartments that are under 750K that are within 3 kilometers of the CBD in Melbourne, that is going to consistently change because the availability changes.
Well, I think other stuff like you know, with relation to stamp duty or land tax,
Totally.
or like the kind of nuances that are always changing in regards to like taxation and rules is like another example where it's evergreen content, but it's on a topic that's often evolving and kind of changing in real time as well.
100%. And that's why I think tools and things like that, particularly when they're plugged into real-time data, is like a really good, like one of the highest reference things
Totally.
within AEO.
Because I now to me what it seems like I see in terms of really great content is, you know, it might be an article, but it's got some kind of like engaging widget kind of within the article, whether it's like a visualization of data, sometimes it's like a quiz or an animation. I get the sense that's to do with engagement metrics, and that as the kind of signal to Google is like, am I right in that line of thinking? Is like, how's
100%.
that? Yeah.
100%. So the DOJ trial basically showed that Google's number one signal as a proxy for quality is user engagement data from Chrome. So they can see at like scale that they might have ranking factors and all these sort of things that they've, you know, used over the years, but the one thing that leads to the best search results that people are happy with is websites that ultimately get people to complete the task.
Yeah.
And so they use this as a proxy for quality. And so a lot of businesses are trying to, you know, companies, websites are trying to implement these engagement things for engagement's sake. And I'm not a believer in that being important, but I do think that introducing friction into a customer experience that improves the quality, or I guess the confidence in the action they're about to go and then take, is critical. And one other interesting thing, right? Like, just to kind of cap off that SEO is dead thing, like imagine you're like Salesforce right now and you're in this situation where for 20 years, you know, you've been seen as the enterprise CRM and like kind of a large, you know, CRM out there. And then suddenly you've got all these AI agentic kind of CRMs coming up in the market. What levers and tactics do you have available to you to go and shift the narrative around your brand? It's content.
Yeah.
Like you really have to be producing content. Like, and if anything, you have to create enough of it quickly enough and at scale so that it shifts the narrative of what's said around your company right now as well.
Interesting.
So like, what does that mean? Like you got to choose websites that are going to get crawled, websites that are going to get referenced. So that the same kind of tactics and skills and analysis, I guess, that you would use as an SEO translate into this kind of answer engine landscape. But it's just with a different use case. So you've got to shift this training data. And again, like, you know, if these large language models finish training on things and kind of crystallize in a moment in time, there is this window, like where now creating content matters more than ever.
It's like training the brain.
Pretty much, right?
It's kind of like almost like a child growing up, where obviously young children have a lot of the way their personality develops, and for good or for bad. And those things happen in the formative years when the brain is being trained. And I think, to your point, I think this is the moment in time when the brain is being trained of a lot of these AIs.
And like on the content piece, I know probably, you know, people, again, to your point, it's like, do I kind of go for scale and create a whole bunch of content and try to have an answer for all of these questions? Or are people better off focusing on creating, one piece of great content that's engaging, that's truly unique, that has some form of data? Maybe they've been able to survey their customers or prospects, or some kind of unique data that no one else can have.
Yeah.
Is you kind of do both? Is it like one's better than the others? How do you kind of think about that?
Yeah. Look, I definitely think it's about, when I try and compete, I talk about inventing into a variable in such a way that others cannot compete with you. Great examples, like, in history, I guess, like Amazon invented Prime and allowed, free delivery and within 2 days. Like extremely hard for everyone in e-com to compete with them because they did that. So I think about these kind of winning moves that, large platforms have done, and the same principles are applicable in small scale. So for me, if you can, as an organization, build a muscle, build a capability that's very hard to replicate, whether it be, like you said, generating survey data and analysis at scale, or building media relationships, doing unique insight and analysis. Maybe it's like interviewing customers and having insight in ways that others don't. Mining your sales calls for insight and information that allows you to have a unique angle that can present information that's not yet been published online. I think that's the sort of stuff that we all need to be thinking about as brands.
Yeah.
Is like, how do you build these kind of capabilities and cornered resources effectively inside your organization that make it difficult to compete with you?
Yeah, I love that. We're getting close to kind of the end. A couple of questions. I want people to have some sort of like strong takeaways. I think we've covered some awesome topics already, and there's some super practical tactics. Again, on the topic of content, if you're a marketer, say you've got $100,000 in your budget that you're willing to spend on, content or maybe AEO more broadly, where are you kind of investing the $100K?
Yeah, I would invest it in finding the data sources and insight that give you a beginning point that's not just publishing information that's already been published online. So that's like, again, that could look like, survey data, data partnerships, relationships. I'm not sure. There's lots of ways to acquire data.
Yep.
I think that's the first. I think the second...
Which is kind of, sorry, just to clarify, and then I guess the starting point to do that is probably to what Mike spoke about before, which is get the MCPs from whether it's Ahrefs, you mentioned SEMrush, Search Console, and start kind of querying and understanding that information. That's kind of step one.
Yeah, totally. And then I think it's like, the interesting thing is like this balance between like presenting information to a large language model publicly and then kind of finding a friction point where I think you should try and convert someone to become a member. And then once they're a member, you get even more data on that person.
Interesting.
And that's like that wall on like, okay, cool. Like large language models will let you kind of show my brand, and that's cool. But if you want the gold, it's on the other side of membership.
Yeah, interesting.
And I think that's like, I'd kind of build some sort of offering that focus on that.
Yeah. How about you, Mike? Do you have a different view, similar view in terms of content?
Yeah, I think it's so dependent on what the company does and what the category they're in. I think I would say generally, if I had $100,000 to spend on marketing, I would be investing actually more in the social space, depending on whether you've kind of got a readily available or a renewable source of some kind of unique information game for the internet. So I think if you're kind of in a business where you do have that, then you should go with that. But I think most companies don't. And I think for 100K, the execution of getting that right is quite challenging, to be honest. And I think like the relative execution of like a really fucking good content strategy, specifically focused on video and high volume, lower production quality, I'd be spending 100,000 on that. And I think that will have a positive impact on pretty much any company that does that. I think I would execute it through a combination of like an agency partner who's kind of knows how to take the story and then convert it into something that works online, and then having a really good, maybe it's going to cost you more than 100 maybe to have both the combination, at least a part of a resource internally. So I think a lot of the reason that, marketing falls over for people, especially in the content game, is one of two problems. Either they try to do too much in-house, or they try to do too much externally. And so when they've got an external partner, if they're capable, but then they've got an internal person that's kind of not owning it and leading the charge and responsible for the outcome, I think that's where things break. So it's about having, if you're going to, you should, and depending on the size of the business and things, there's value in having a good strategic external partner, but it's equally important that you've got the right person in the seat on the internal side, because the way that those two things work together is basically going to determine the outcome.
Yeah, love it. Great advice. So final question to end on. I want to talk about, 30, 45 days, call it. What are 3 practical things or a couple of practical things people can do? I think we've nailed the first one, which is understand the data, understand how you're showing up, where you're showing up, and how your competitors are showing up relative to you to try and diagnose, where to start. What are you doing kind of next from there?
Yeah, assuming you've done some prompt tracking, and I'll make sure that's from a few different vectors, by the way. It's like, not just like keywords or prompts that matter to you in terms of best this, best that, but like you versus a competitor.
Yeah, great.
Looking at the training data with the open web kind of search turned off. And then the next piece there is like, again, taking that and going, sweet, what sources were used? What missing information is there to kind of shift the answers, right? Is it information that needs to be published online on my own website or other websites that are being sourced and cited? So that's kind of the second bucket. And the third really is like paying attention to these other surface areas which probably were neglected, whether it be like, Trustpilot, product review, these other kind of review websites that are out there. It's effectively
Finder.com.au.
Exactly. Effectively reputation management work is that kind of that validation piece.
And I guess from maybe one of the ways to start thinking about driving more of that is like embedding that from like a marketing automation point of view more into your customer journey, right? Making sure you've got you're capturing whether it's NPS data or just survey data throughout, the customer journey. It's something that we've been really pushing at The Garden. It's just like capturing more data throughout the customer journey to better understand what's happening. I hadn't really thought about how we now actually take those insights, publish it, and create unique content, which is definitely something I'm going to do. But I think that's probably something people should be thinking about as well. Is like, how do I capture more user generated content when people are kind of either engaging before they purchase with me or like during that cycle or afterwards? Because I think there's a lot of opportunity in that.
I think that is exactly right, and I think there's no excuse for not collecting more data now as well. And maybe I'll go back on something my comment before. I think some of the barriers to entry to collect data at scale from existing customers, I think it kind of depends where people are on the journey. So it's like if you're not currently collecting at least an email address or some kind of like data that you can either capture the contact details so you can then have an opportunity to collect that data from them in the future, or taking the interaction data. So that could be pricing, transaction data, all of these types of different types of information, and then presenting that back as kind of information gained to the internet. I think that is kind of actually within the reach of a lot of people, and I think it is. And I think the combination of that with the piece, as I mentioned before, around video, because as we know, YouTube's a huge channel for AEO, and also for SEO, being obviously owned by Google. You can use that on LinkedIn, which is one of the most, cited things as well. And so I think it's the combination of collecting more data and doing a really good job of that, and then distributing that data through mostly video.
Cool. And then finally, tools-wise, for anyone listening, you mentioned a couple before. We've spoken about Search Console, Google Analytics, Ahrefs, which is a great tool for anyone who's not using it. SEMrush, you mentioned a couple of other ones. Is there any other tools, emerging tools you're using kind of in your stack to better understand, how your business is showing up across LLMs?
Yeah, I like Peak AI, PWC, pretty cool. Straightforward, MCP connected, which is great. Firecrawl is pretty powerful as well if you're trying to kind of store a page and make it, available for you to analyze with, be like Claude Code or something like that. But yeah, starting with the basics, I think, like prompt tracking, and then just really digging into each of those pages and seeing what's important to focus on is, in my view, the most important thing. Yeah.
Anything to add from your side?
I think it's mostly just like the value I've got the most is kind of like connecting different tools that I hadn't connected before. Yeah. So as whether it's Ahrefs and Jira or Asana or whatever it might be, they're kind of different toolings, and understanding what inputs you're doing within the business that result in the output. Because obviously the activity you're doing is the leading indicator, and then oftentimes whether it's the prompt tracking or SEO or conversion data or whatever, that's kind of the lagging indicator. So a lot of the times I'd never been able to use those two data sets together in a seamless kind of way. And I think for me, the connection via MCP of these different existing tools has been the big uplift.
Cool. Awesome. Well, appreciate both of you guys joining me. Awesome conversation. I think lots of practical tips in there. We could have sat here and spoken for hours and you guys would have kept going. For anyone looking...
Hopefully I wouldn't die in the last episode.
Claritine needs to sponsor.
God, it was dusty, but I'm glad to
For anyone interested in this topic and just general good quality digital marketing, both these guys produce a lot of content on LinkedIn. So jump on, give them a follow. I'm sure you can reach out to them if you've got any questions, or feel free to reach out to me. But appreciate having you guys on, and thanks very much everyone for tuning in.
Legend. Thank you.
Awesome.
Good on you.
Legend. Cheers.